and welcome to Inside Pleasantville School Districts. I'm Emily Rubin Persons, your host, and today we're sitting here with Tim Whipple, our Assistant Superintendent of Business. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Great. So, I just can't believe that it's been 3 years that you're in the district.
Yes, it's gone very quickly.
Very quickly. And today, what we really wanted to talk about was the budget. Yes. It passed. Record number. I think it's been quite a number of years that we passed with such a high percentage, right?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we really appreciate the community's support on our budget. It passed with an overall yes vote of about 80%, which is very consistent with the last couple of years.
That's great.
So we're very appreciative of the community for their support.
That's great. But it was a difficult budget season, in January, when you were first giving the budget presentations to the board, there was a lot of concern with the governor and the budget gap that he was talking about and how that was going to impact us. What was that about? That's
right. Yeah. Originally, early in the budgeting season, Medicaid was the big kind of story. Medicaid. And New York State had potentially a $6 billion deficit with Medicaid, and there was rumors that we would see state aid reductions as a result of those proposed deficits.
And that would have been really very difficult to have that big gap, because I remember that he was also not going to tell us what aid reduction it was going to look like, that it might have been over the course of the school year next year.
Exactly.
Right? And how would that have been a problem for us?
Yeah, there was a lot of uncertainty with this budgeting cycle this year. We had the Medicaid issue, obviously the pandemic. Mm-hmm. COVID happened mid-budget season, so we were trying to refocus our efforts on seeing what effect that would have.
Right.
The most unusual of budget seasons, I would say, in my career.
Just crazy.
To really have not a lot of information from the state. Usually by the time the budget is passed and the voters vote, you have enough information, you know what your state aid will be, and able to properly plan for what your expenditures will be the following year. This year was all different, and we really, still to this date, don't know a clear picture of what our revenues will be for next year.
Right. Now, we don't know necessarily what the revenues will be, and there was also the CARES Act, where we were supposed to receive some federal funding, and...
That's right. So when the CARES Act was first passed, the federal government allocated a certain amount of money for every New York State school district. For Pleasantville, we were allocated about $53,000. What the governor did and New York State did is they took that money and they used it to fill the deficit they had at the time. So although we were allocated some money from the federal government, it was really taken right away. So that was really kind of an in and out situation, really had a neutral effect on our budget.
It's very challenging. But in the end, you were able to manage all the different divisions of the school district, the school, the 3 schools, the special ed facilities, and you were able to manage a great budget with no increase in taxes.
That's right.
How did you do that?
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, it was difficult. We knew that the Board of Education asked us to try to keep the tax levy increase at a minimum this year. Obviously, we knew, and the board knew, that there were a lot of people that were potentially hurting. Jobs were being lost. People were being furloughed. Yeah. It was a priority to try to keep the levy, maintain educational programs and the instructional program as best we could, but try to keep taxes at a minimum. So we're obviously very proud that we were able to increase the budget, keep expenditures basically the same. The instructional program the same, and the tax levy only increased by $300,000, which is about 0.7%.
That's great.
Which basically means that the tax rate increase will be pretty much zero next year.
That's so important to our taxpayers. I mean, you just, all across the board, everyone's really needing to tighten their own belts. So I'm really glad that we were able to do that for the community. So where did the extra revenue come from?
Yeah, so good question. We used a bunch of different philosophies this year to try to balance the budget. Obviously, one of the areas was we looked at our tuition numbers. We do receive tuition money from other public school districts that their students attend our school, Mechanical Hills being a perfect example.
Right.
We do find out every February what decision these mechanical students who are rising ninth graders will make between the 3 school districts. we're very proud and glad to hear that about 13 or 14 students will be attending Pleasantville. So that's additional tuition revenue that we could count on.
That's huge. And I know several years ago, I think we only had 1 or 2 students.
Exactly.
So
yes.
The year that we really needed to get that big bump in our Pecanico students was the year that we needed
Absolutely.
it with this
Absolutely.
budget crunch.
So that was one area of revenue that we were able to depend on. The other one was our fund balance. And a fund balance, for those who don't know, is kind of like your savings account. Can be accumulated from past, previous years, and savings between what you spend in one year and what the revenue is. So based on where we are with our fund balance, we felt confident that we could increase that in a year where we wanted to try to keep taxes at a minimum. And that was used to kind of bridge the gap between our expenditures and our revenue.
Yeah, it's something that, from all the 8 years that I've been on the board, we talk about, and the terminology is a little bit different. They always talk about we're going to step down off the fund balance, which means, we're just not going to use as much of it. And I think when I first joined the board, they were using quite a lot, I want to say up to $1 million to fill in a budget gap. And we've really reduced that, so that enabled the fund balance to increase a little bit. And now that we really need it, we have that money, which is really great. And the best part is that there's room for the program, all the things from the strategic plan that we want to try and put into place, the diversity, the training, and some of the cost savings we received were from, I would imagine just not being in school since March, we've received a little cost savings.
Yes. Yeah, it's a good point. The board has made it a priority to use less fund balance in the budget. Just a few years ago, I think you alluded to it, we were using around $3 million in fund balance every year to balance our budget. We've got that down to about $600,000 last year. Now it's going up to about $1 million this coming year. So, but I guess the point is we've been able to carefully manage the fund balance, and now is a time where we need to use it, and it is there available. So that's through great planning from the board and the administration over the past few years.
And now with COVID and the pandemic, and we have all these other things all these other costs that we didn't anticipate. When you were planning the budget, I think everybody just assumed things were going to start getting back to normal, but they're not. So now we have all these other expenses of, the cleaning and supplies.
Correct.
So where did we find cost savings that are going to help with some of these extra expenses? Yeah,
absolutely. So from right about mid-March, when students were not in the buildings anymore, we saw some savings in different areas of the budget. Substitute costs, as you can imagine, were non-existent at that point.
Because there was no Washington trip, for example, so there were no substitutes.
Exactly.
Or just substitutes just in general
Absolutely.
Across the board.
Yep.
Yeah.
Electricity costs just have been down. We've done a lot of lighting projects, so we found some savings there. It was a mild winter, so natural gas costs were down. But a lot of transportation costs that we would typically have, we found savings there. So we obviously are going to be able to use those monies for next year for things, as you said, things that we couldn't have anticipated at the time.
It's
PPE, masks, hand sanitizer, all the things that we're going to need in order to open school in September, hopefully, will be, that money will be there and allow us to, use those resources.
It's so great you were able to, pivot those costs, the dollars from one area to another to help with these savings, so that we have the money to put into the right places. That's really great. I was looking at, I wanted to just have you highlight a couple of things that are on your page on your website, because you have the budget brochure, which has so much important information in there.
Yeah,
207 pages of it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we take a lot of pride in keeping our kind of section of the website up to date. If you go to the business office kind of section, you'll see there's budget information for next year. We keep track of our fiscal stress score, which
what is that?
Yeah, fiscal stress score is a metric that the comptroller uses to kind of identify the schools that are susceptible to fiscal stress and those that are doing very well financially. I'm very proud to say that we received the highest mark you can get from the comptroller. We have 0 points, and points are bad, I guess, in this kind of metric. So we've been given a level of no designation, which is the highest level you can get.
That's great.
And they look at what your fund balance levels are, your cash flow, if you have any negative balances or deficits. Obviously we don't. So we're very proud of our score, but you can find that on the website.
That's great.
As well as many other things that I think the community would find helpful or interesting.
That's great. So, well, thank you so much for taking us through the budget process. It's been just crazy, and who knows what September is going to look like, but we definitely seem like we are in a good place with our budget, with our expenses and revenues, and I appreciate you taking the time to walk us through this.
Well, thank you very much for having me today. It's been really fun and interesting, so thank you very much.
Sure. Hi, so now I'm sitting here with Steve Chamberlain, our Director of Facilities, 14 years now in Pleasantville.
That's correct.
And you have really helped keep our buildings, our home, in pristine shape. I mean, we take those walks every year. You take us, the board, all around the buildings and point out everything. I mean, we get down into, Lou loves going into those funny little rooms in all the different buildings, and you point out, the doors and the lighting fixtures and all these different things that you do to make sure that the place is maintained. So what are you working on now? What's the list? You always give us that great presentation in September.
Well, we've had to adjust our list a little bit. The schools have been closed for a while, which has actually given us an opportunity to jump on some things earlier than we might have and add some additional things. So the first thing we did once the schools were empty was we started painting the inside of the district, basically, and it was a good way for me to socially distance my staff because you can paint by yourself, and we really moved through all the buildings. Bedford Road School, we have painted all of the corridors and some of the classrooms that were in desperate need of paint. We've done all the interior railings, some exterior railings, and the same thing at the middle school and the high school.
That's great. Yeah. Was painting on the list for this year? Not
to the extent that we did. We always have painting on the list, but we sort of just try to really prioritize the really bad areas. But this has really given us an opportunity to sort of do a blanket paint job on the interior.
That's great. I would imagine with the schools being closed that there's some wear and tear that you don't have to keep up with. For example, the gym floors, you always do that every year, but maybe not this year?
I'm thinking that we probably won't. I'm trying to prioritize our annual floor stripping and gym floor refinishing because I'm trying to keep my guys socially distanced, and a lot of those things you need 2 or 3 guys for. So we're trying to, I don't want to say minimize things, but maybe cut back on some of the areas that don't have a lot of wear and tear, so we don't have to have a lot of guys working together.
Plus we don't even know what gym is going to look like in September.
That's
Our
true.
Gyms might be classrooms.
That's true.
So that smell of the material to refinish the floors, it might be better that we don't have that if those rooms are if the gyms are going to be used. I mean, we don't know, but if it's going to be used as a classroom. And then, to keep the buildings clean, that's like the big, reopen in September, although now we also have our special ed school going forward. What's the process in cleaning and sanitizing the building?
Well, that's sort of a moving target, I would say. We sort of, once you think you know everything you might have to do, you sort of learn something new. So actually our extended year program is kind of a trial run for us for September in a way. So we have students in the building every day, and they're using a good portion of the high school. So it's given us an opportunity to work on our sanitizing methods because obviously we have to sanitize those spaces every day.
Right. Do you have a sanitizing machine?
I have one machine in the district that I was fortunate enough to buy about 3 or 4 years ago when we had MRSA. It was very prevalent. Right. And it's an electrostatic sprayer. It's a Clorox product. They're very popular. If you see on the news where spaces are being sanitized, this is probably what they're using. And a machine like that, a custodian can go into a classroom and sanitize it in about 10 minutes. So
Wow.
it's an electrostatic spray, so it actually attaches to all surfaces 360 degrees around and sanitizes things.
So that's one machine.
One machine. We are trying to buy 2 more, but they're just simply unavailable.
So we have a lot of classrooms. We have a lot of rooms in our buildings.
We do. I can't give you an exact count, but it's a lot.
How would we sanitize the building? I mean, do we have to sanitize an entire building once a week?
Well, I think we're looking at even more frequently than that. And, Tim Whipple and I have sat down, and it's really just, you just have to do the math. You have to calculate the spaces you have. I have a certain amount of manpower to do the work. You have to calculate how much time it's going to take you to sanitize. So I mentioned that electrostatic sprayer will take about 10 minutes,
right.
Where if someone had to go in and manually do it, which is going to be the case in a lot of the classrooms,
right.
It's probably a 30-minute process.
Right.
We do have an outside cleaning company that we use for a portion of the middle school and Bedford Road School. We are in conversation with them to see how they might be able to help us in September.
Mm-hmm. And then, certain areas, of course, have to definitely be cleaned every single day because of the high traffic, whether it's your doorways and your light switches and handrails and certain classrooms, and then there might be other classrooms or spaces that you are less used.
That's correct. We're definitely going to have to prioritize in the high touch areas, door handles and railings. Are going to have to be sanitized multiple times a day, including bathrooms.
And then what about, I would imagine for your staff, generally they work Monday through Friday. Would you consider, is there some way, because you might have to be doing some of this work over the weekend and overtime costs could hinder. Is there, in the Westchester Putnam School Board Association had a webinar last week on the legal issues, and one of the topics they brought up was staggering the schedules to help with that. Is that something that you might be able to do with your staff?
It is something we might be able to do. We've also looked at limiting school usage after hours and closing our buildings at 6 o'clock, which would allow me to have my night crew, who works until midnight, in earlier to help with that process. So I think really at this point, Mr. Whipple and I have been discussing all the different things that we might do, but it's all going to come down to what September is going to look like and what the educational program is going to be, and then we're going to have to adapt what we do to that, to fit that.
Right. With shields for desks or shields around teachers so that they could do what they need to do without being constricted by masks, and there's so much more work. But that's not the only thing you're working on. There's a lot of, let's say, fun stuff that you're doing from that relates to the bond and the tennis courts and the field work. So take us through some of those projects from the capital projects that you're working on.
Okay, that's something else we were able to get a little bit of an early start on. So we have our capital projects happening this summer, and right now what's going on is we have demolished the tennis courts. We'll be rebuilding the tennis courts, so they are gone. They milled all the asphalt there so it could be recycled, instead of just ripping it up and throwing it in a dumpster. The same thing with the 2 D zones on the large turf field. Those are the D-shaped areas at the ends of the fields. We have some drainage issues there. So we have milled the asphalt there. We'll be improving the drainage and then resurfacing those areas. That work is also underway. And we've started construction on the 2 security vestibules, one at the middle school and one at Bedford Road School.
Great.
As well as the reconfiguration of the middle school main office. That work has started.
And that reconfiguration is, what was that again? What do you have to do in the middle school front office?
Well, we're actually making it a little larger. We're bumping out the front of the main office. Probably go out about 9 feet from where it is.
Wow.
And it's going to be all glass there, which enables us to push that front desk, the greeter's desk, forward, and giving more space to the to the 2 secretaries that work in there.
That's great. That'll be so refreshing.
Absolutely.
When everybody
It's
goes
needed.
back in.
Yeah,
Right. Okay. And what else?
So we have some HVAC work going on at the Bedford Road School. We are working on a new building management system that controls all the HVAC over there. The system that we had was 17 years old and was really quite outdated. So we're looking at state-of-the-art building management system, and we're also doing what's called a 4-pipe system in our large air handlers and some select classrooms, which gives us the ability to heat and cool at the same time, which you need for proper dehumidification.
Right. I remember that was a problem, I think 2 years ago, when the humidity was quite high and the classrooms were really struggling with getting that,
Absolutely.
being dehumidified properly to be comfortable.
Right. We had a summer where it just did not stop raining, and the way that building is kind of built right into that hillside there.
Right.
It's sometimes difficult to
And
keep
anybody
it
who has a
properly.
basement or a crawl space knows what that feels like.
Exactly.
Right. Good.
And that goes back to really, protecting your assets. We can't let a building like that just be ruined by extremely humid conditions.
Right. Now, you've been amazing with that, with the LED light switching, the electricity control. I mean, you brought some of those costs way down with, taking the coffee pots out of the classrooms and that kind of thing.
Microwaves, right.
The microwaves and toaster ovens.
Yeah, well, the LED conversions have been really a win for us. Bedford Road School is 100% LED lighting, and now that's another thing we got an early jump on, was we did an LED conversion in the high school. So the high school now is 100% LED lighting.
Wow. That's huge.
It's great.
That's huge.
Reduce our usage quite a bit.
Wow. And you're not going to be able to get all the capital projects done this year. I think you said
no. There's 2 phases. This is phase 1 that we're working through this year. Next time would be phase 2.
Phase 2, and this is the bond that we voted on a year ago. So it's hard to remember all the different things because we had so many conversations about what goes into what went into that wish list. And it's like we want ice skating rinks, but in a practicality, we can't have an ice skating rink. We'll just satisfy ourselves with a new tennis court, which is still good. What else? Anything else going on with the facilities of this great district? I mean, you've been so fabulous in keeping our house in order.
Well, thank you for that. Well, we have a routine summer in-house maintenance projects that we work through every year, and those I have 4 maintenance guys that each have a special talent, and we take this opportunity to really clean things up. We've had I'll give you one example. We had a classroom in the older section of the high school where the floor buckled and really was in need of replacement. So one of my men, Richard Devine, ripped out that entire floor and redid it from scratch.
Wow.
And it's great that I have the ability to do those projects in-house and talented guys, because it saves us a ton of money.
Yeah, no, we love that every year when you give us that list of completed projects and how many of those things you're able to do in-house. And even when we were looking at the capital projects and the high cost of some of those from the architect, and you were able to say, you know what, this one I can do. I can do that in-house.
Correct. And we did break out a few of those.
Yeah, and that, again, that goes back to the hard work of budgeting to make sure that we're keeping everything in order so that our taxpayers are not, overwhelmed with a tax bill at the end of the year or twice a year, or however that works. Right. So, so I'm just looking at my notes to see if there were any other things that we wanted to make sure, the sanitizing of the buildings, I think, is just going to be so huge. And, those teachers have so many wonderful decorations, and it makes for the classrooms to be so engaging for the students. How is that going to work?
We've talked about, certainly in the Bedford Road School classrooms where they have area rugs, we're removing those area rugs. They're just too hard to sanitize. And then at some point, I'll take a walk through with Mrs. Galati, and we'll talk about some of the decorations as well that are in those classrooms that we might want to set aside for a while.
Right. I think so.
Yeah.
Well, it's, a lot of unknowns. I mean, we all walked out of the building on March 11th or so, not knowing what was going to happen. And here we are. We still don't really know what September is going to bring. I mean, hopefully we're going to be back in the school most of the time. But at least you're making sure that the house is in order so that whenever we do get back in, we have the right beautiful space to learn and be educated and congregate in a careful and socially distant way that we need to be in order to get through this crazy time. So,
For sure.
Thank you so much for joining us
my
today.
pleasure.
And thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Pleasantville Schools. I'd like to thank Tim Whipple and Steve Chamberlain again for taking us on this important tour through some of the behind the scenes of Pleasantville School District, and look forward to some of our upcoming episodes where we continue the conversation of Reopen 2020. Have a great day.